Hello and welcome to Nocab Game Design. In this episode, I'm taking a look at the second combat operation of Chapter 8. That's right, the second combat operation. Chapter 8 features 2 levels. You can find the analysis of the first one at the link in the description or in the top right corner now. In this level, the goal is to reunite Welkin and Alicia with Squad 7, then smash through the enemy camp. A simple mission profile, but it's the details that give this level good design. Let's start with the 2 most important elements of any level: the map and the mission profile. Sometimes you can tell the developers started with a map, then populated it with content and placed a mission objective over it. Other times it feels like the mission idea came first and then a level was made to support it, but most common I think is a bit of both. The map influences the mission and the mission influences the map. This level, titled Reunion in the Forest, feels like the mission profile came first, then a level was made to facilitate it. The enemy is bearing down on a weakened and leaderless Squad 7. They're outnumbered and outgunned. Things are getting desperate. But just in the nick of time, the dual heroes of Welkin and Alicia arrive, and suddenly the tide turns. Squad 7 steamrolls across the Empire's camp and claims victory from the jaws of defeat. It's a fun experience. The desperation makes the turn feel more dramatic, but in order to set it up, there are a few things the developers need to do. First, they need to build a sense of desperation in the player, but they can't be too heavy-handed or risk the player giving up. Next, any way the developers can grow the tension will make the snap feel more potent. And finally, they need the play feel to make a sudden reversal and make the player feel like they're crushing it. This level has one goal and one goal only: to make the largest swing in the battlefield possible, to make the player experience what it's like to convert a sure loss into a win. Now, how do the developers accomplish this goal? Well, a big part of it comes from the level architecture, but there are some other techniques and details that the developers use. So, let's take a look. First, the desperation. The player's base camp is in the bottom corner of the map and more or less surrounded. There's nowhere to retreat. You just have to make do with the defenses offered to you. Squad 7 is literally backed into a tight corner. The defenses that are set up here are modest, to say the least. Sure, there are a few sandbags, but otherwise no natural cover. The enemy's lancers have a straight line view for their rockets, and so do the foot soldiers and tanks. Everything is pushing down on the player. The level effectively makes an anvil, and the enemies are a hammer. The player is stuck in the middle. Alternatively, the player also has the same unblocked view, and we'll get to that. But right now, when you're outnumbered almost 2-1, the open terrain is not an advantage. Next, the base camp is fairly small. Everything is tightly packed, so a mortar blast is devastating, able to paint several targets in a single turn. And even if the player moves all their units into safety, the mortar will still destroy the sandbags, removing that defensive structure from the player, which just makes dealing with the incoming enemy units even harder next turn. That last point isn't a purely architectural one. Setting up the level map to force the player into a small area isn't by itself a disadvantage, but it does set up a dangerous situation that the developers capitalize on in multiple ways. I want to emphasize this point because I think it's important. Level architecture by itself does not usually modify the play much. It just exists. It's the bones that the developers use to add content on top of. A good designer can recognize that a given level's architecture presents a choke point or a good view or whatever, and they can build an encounter that makes use of that architectural feature in some way, either giving the player an advantage or disadvantage or placing important plot points in the area. Here, the designers of Valkyria Chronicles set up the level architecture to punish whatever is standing in the bottom left-hand corner of the map for all the reasons I mentioned earlier. And then they force the player to stand there. The Edelweiss is stuck. The player has to defend it. The developers force the player to stand in the poor terrain, then they punish all the weaknesses of the terrain. And this is what builds the sense of desperation. This is good design. Yes, it's a design that's frustrating the player, but that's what it was designed to do, and it's really good at doing its job. In a few minutes, I'll talk about how the exact same architectural designs are used to give the player an advantage instead of a disadvantage. But before then, I want to talk about tension. In the mission briefing, it's made clear to the player Welkin and Alicia need to get back to Squad 7 as soon as humanly possible. This is important and therefore repeated a few times. Get back to the others ASAP. Repetition of important information, good design, but More relevant now is that this sets up the situational tension. They're so close to the squad, just right across the river, and the player is desperate. Well, desperate might be a strong word, but they understand and they can feel that they're in a losing position. Something needs to change before the player can win. This is the source of the tension. The player is in a bad place, and in order to win, they've been explicitly told to reunite Welkin and Alicia with the rest of the squad, but it's hard to get there. The bridge is destroyed, and there's no clear path to take. The only other option is to go in the wrong direction through an enemy camp. If you watched the previous episode, I made a point about how challenging it was for these two scouts to take on a single shock trooper. Well, this camp has 3. Also, like the previous episode, the shock troopers are set up in a way where the player can just run around the camp and ignore them. As a brief aside, this is a good example of healthy difficulty growth in game design. The previous level introduced a small challenge in a relatively safe situation, then in the next level, the encounter is scaled up, but the solution is the same. It's an effective way to teach and grow challenge at the same speed that the player grows in skill. Good design. Aside over, back to tension. I want to point out that it grows with the length of the path. It takes about 3 or 4 actions to reunite one of these units with the rest of the squad, and these are scouts, the farthest and fastest moving units in the game. 3 actions worth of movement is really far for a scout. This is long on purpose, as it mainly builds tension. Every turn, the defense gets harder as the enemy moves in the more to destroy sandbags. Every turn, the desperation, and therefore situational tension, grows. Making the path long is good design, but it risks getting boring. Forcing the player to walk through a long path just to build tension is not enough. The path itself should also be a little exciting, and generally speaking, it's a good idea to do everything you can to make walking not boring. There are a lot of things you can do to make walking in games compelling, but the developers do a few things here. There are hidden landmines, making walking slightly dangerous and therefore exciting. There are scouts on the road, giving the player something to shoot at. There are snipers and shock troopers, which gives the player something to hide from. And lastly, the scenery is unique and cool. The bottom of a river canyon, it's small, but every little thing helps to make walking slightly less boring. This is actually a really good exercise in game design. Analyze the games you enjoy and look out for how the developers make the common and boring real-life act of walking more enjoyable. Let me know in the comments, and I'm serious. Analyzing the games you play is the best way to get better at game design. Finally, the player reunites Welkin and the Edelweiss, and everything changes. All the disadvantages afforded by the architecture now become advantages. The enemy units are also tightly grouped together with nowhere to run. There's an open field, making it easy for a tank to push through and destroy the camp. I won't repeat myself from earlier to list out all the specifics, but generally speaking, the tables have turned. Now the player is the one bringing down the hammer. And it's fun. The sudden turn, crushing the enemies that caused so much distress earlier. The goal of the level that I outlined earlier is successfully achieved, snatching a crushing victory from the jaws of defeat. I played this level a few times, and I'm pretty sure the enemy AI is set so they clump together to make a juicy target for the tank's mortars. But there's also a light tank, whose AI tells it to overextend itself. A Lancer can walk around this hill and get a perfect shot on the exposed weak point in the back. And this section is fairly short, at least in contrast to the long, winding section from earlier. Driving the tank into the blocking wall is easy, and it only takes a single unit to clear out the second camp and win the level outright. Once the Edelweiss is online, the victory only takes a turn, maybe 2. Again, the architecture here is set up to make the player feel like they are in a domineering, crushing position. And they feel this way because they are. The architecture affords the player major advantages at this point in the gameplay. But it didn't have to be this way. The developers could have given the enemy base strong natural defenses. The architecture could continue to pose challenges to the player, but it doesn't. The architecture here is a tool the developers use to advance their design goals, and they use it well. This is, after all, a masterpiece game. I would expect nothing less. This is the main point I want to make with the video. The designers want to produce the best play experience possible, and they do this by authoring a mission profile that gives the player a strong emotional response. In this level specifically, it's a sudden turn, flipping a losing situation into a win, but it could be any experience that you as a designer want your players to have. But simply authoring the experience is not enough. The plot, the characters, the dialogue, it's not enough. The level architecture and map layout itself has to work to enhance the experience. Simply taking a random level map and trying to lay this mission profile on top of it would not produce the same results. It would not be as good of a level. Your job as a game designer is to find a way to make every aspect of the level work together towards a common design goal. And, in my opinion, the designers of Valkyria Chronicles do a masterful job of it in this level. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you'd probably also enjoy the analysis I did on the first combat operation of Chapter 8. I recommend you check it out. Also, please consider subscribing. It doesn't cost anything, and if you want to learn more about game design, this is an easy way to do it. And thank you. In the next episode, we return to Rangries for some urban combat and a royal rescue. I'll see you there.